over 3,000 years in the past, long before the widespread mastery of iron, before the emergence of Rome and before the scattered embers gave rise to the classical civilizations of Greece, a remarkable age was taking shape, an age forged in bronze. Powerful monarchs and towering armies held sway, contending for riches, glory, and the blessings of gods that many today would find strange. In the late 19th century, scholars of antiquity believed they understood the most influential states of that distant Bronze Age. They recognized mighty Egypt, whose ancient monuments still stood along the banks of the Nile. They recognized empires in Mesopotamia, such as Assyria and Babylon, famed from biblical passages and the newest archaeological discoveries. And they gave special attention to Mycenaean civilization on the Greek mainland, seen as the ancestral power that inspired Homer's epic tales of Troy. Yet there was another empire, largely hidden by the dust of centuries, that had once contended on the world stage with the likes of Egypt and Babylon. This was the empire of the Hittites, revealed in fragments across ancient sources, but for a long time scarcely more than a half-remembered name. In Old Testament references composed many centuries after the end of the Bronze Age, the Hittites, described as the children of Heth, are mentioned only briefly and appear mainly as an insignificant people dwelling in hilly territory near Canaan. The Bible makes passing references, yet never hints they were once lords of an extensive realm that covered large parts of Anatolia and northern Syria. For a great span of history, these Hittites remained in the margins, mentioned but poorly understood. Then, in the early decades of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire allowed increased entry to foreign travelers and scholars. One such explorer, a French archaeologist, set off across central Anatolia in search of Roman ruins, but found something of far greater significance. This discovery would upend the scholarly consensus and forever reshape understanding of the ancient Near East. By 1834, the Ottoman Sultan had opened many interior lands, hoping that greater international contact might halt his empire's downward slide. The French explorer in question was Charles Texier. Initially, he was looking for Tavium, an ancient Roman settlement. In the rural heartland, locals told him of mysterious ruins in the mountain districts, old vestiges that certainly were not Roman, not Greek, and not Assyrian. Texier made his way toward these rumored remains and eventually arrived before the gigantic weathered foundations of a city of stone perched high in remote highlands. There, among colossal blocks and strange carvings, he saw images of unfamiliar figures, people shown in relief with peculiar boots curled upward at the toe, wearing unfamiliar attire and bearing no resemblance to known Mesopotamian or Egyptian art. He also discovered shards of cuneiform inscriptions in a style different from what scholars were decoding in Mesopotamia. At that moment, Texier could only marvel at his find. He could not know he had rediscovered Hattusa, once the capital of the Hittite Empire, a power so formidable that modern historians would later rank it alongside Babylon, Egypt, and Assyria during the late Bronze Age. Over the following decades, scholars painstakingly analyzed the site at Boaz Köy, today's name for the place encompassing the ruins of ancient Hattusa. Excavations uncovered an enormous cache of clay tablets. While some were written in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the ancient Near East, many used a previously unknown language. The decipherment process took time, but with dedicated study, it was proven that this was an Indo-European tongue, indeed the oldest known example of an Indo-European language anywhere, now called Hittite. Through these texts, and through continuing archaeological work, the true scope of the Hittite civilization became apparent. They had once ruled a vast domain stretching across Anatolia and into the Levant, sparring politically and militarily with major powers from the Nile to the Tigris. Their armies clashed with pharaohs and fought in monumental engagements, such as the Battle of Kadesh, the earliest large-scale military action in recorded detail. Hittite troops may even have played a role in the Trojan War, if not as a leading protagonist, then at least as a major factor in the region's strategic web, controlling or influencing Troy, known to them as Walusa. Through centuries of accomplishment and adversity, the Hittites rose to become a recognized world power, then succumbed as the Bronze Age world collapsed around the 12th century BCE. Their capital was abandoned, and a realm that had once equaled the might of other ancient empires dissolved in the storms of an era that brought an end to many kingdoms. In the gloom that followed, knowledge of the Hittites waned to such an extent that only faint echoes persisted. The story of rediscovering these lost kings and their extraordinary civilization remains one of archaeology's great epics. To place the Hittites in context, it is helpful to begin with the people they encountered in central Anatolia, the Hattians. These indigenous inhabitants had lived in the region around the Red River for centuries, building settlements and engaging in trade with Mesopotamian states to the southeast. Their population appears to have been non-Indo-European, speaking a language unrelated to Hittite. Over time, their wealth and prosperity grew. The Great Bend of the Red River, encircled by fertile pockets and resource-rich highlands, served them well. Early urban hubs like Alakahoyuk emerged, showcasing metalwork, artistic traditions, and varied religious practices. By the 3rd millennium BCE, trade routes were well established, connecting the mountains and plateaus of Anatolia with Assyrian and Sumerian cities in Mesopotamia, as well as with other regions beyond. Akkadian influence grew, especially after the time of Sargon of Akkad, a conqueror who forced certain areas of Anatolia to submit. However, Hattian territories persisted for centuries, resisting full subjugation by external forces. Eventually, the greatest threat did not come from Mesopotamia, but from migratory people arriving from the north. These newcomers, whose language was Indo-European, would gradually coalesce into distinct polities in the region. Among them were the ancestors of the Hittites. Around 1650 BCE, a leader named Labana established the Old Kingdom of the Hittites. Older traditions record that he took control of Hattian lands and created a new capital at Hattusa, which had been violently destroyed by a previous generation of Indo-European war chiefs. Contrary to the standard pattern of subjugation, Labana and his successors integrated indigenous ways and beliefs into their own. They appropriated local deities, venerated the sun and storm gods, and kept the basic framework of older communities while placing themselves atop the social pyramid. The new ruling class continued to speak an Indo-European language, even as they adopted elements of Hattian culture. Despite occasional internal strife, the Hittite Old Kingdom made its mark through campaigns aimed at neighboring states. For example, under the early reign of kings such as Hattusili I and Mursili I, Hittite armies launched ambitious expeditions. One of the most notable occurred around 1595 BCE, when Hittite forces struck at Babylon. In a dramatic move, they sacked the city, a center of Mesopotamian civilization, securing prestige and significant loot. They withdrew back to Hattusa, but their victory was fleeting. Soon the empire was beset by fresh dangers, including rebellious vassals, new waves of invasions, and repeated episodes of palace intrigue. Murderous plots plagued the royal succession. Eventually, these troubles stifled Hittite expansion, and the Old Kingdom stagnated. That period of disruption set the stage for renewed vigor under later rulers. In the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, the Hittites would become one of the greatest imperial forces of their time. Traditionally, historians divide Hittite history into 3 phases: the Old Kingdom, roughly 1650 to 1500 BCE, a less understood Middle Kingdom, about 1500-1400 BCE, and the New Kingdom or Empire period, circa 1400-1200 BCE. Excavation in the early 20th century at Hattusa unearthed tens of thousands of clay tablets. They provided details about the monarchy, law codes, religious customs, epic warfare, and diplomacy. These texts illustrated that once the Old Kingdom overcame its internal troubles, it transitioned, possibly through a short Middle Kingdom, into an imperial age. By the 14th century BCE, the Hittite domain extended over nearly all of central Anatolia, including important ports along the Aegean. Farther south, it controlled northern Syria and significant trade corridors. During this empire period, one of the standout rulers was Suppiluliuma. He unified the Hittite heartland, ended the previous fractiousness, and initiated successful campaigns that subdued many neighboring states. His most formidable opponent was the Kingdom of Mitanni, to the east. In the process of toppling Mitanni, he extended Hittite influence and used diplomacy when it served him better than raw force. He also incorporated lands that had once been under Egyptian influence in the Levant. Shortly afterward, as the Hittites pressed deeper into the south, they came into direct contact with Egypt itself. A significant clash loomed, setting the stage for one of the most famous battles in ancient history. Egypt had recovered under energetic pharaohs like Seti I and his son, Ramesses II. Determined to safeguard Egyptian footholds in the Levant, Ramesses II set his sights on the strategic city of Kadesh in what is now Syria. The Hittites controlled that area, but Ramesses expected an easy victory if he moved quickly. He marched north with several divisions, only to discover too late that Hittite forces had arrived first. The result, now known as the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, was enormous for its time. Hittite chariots, often manned by 3 warriors rather than 2, burst upon the Egyptian divisions, and for a moment it seemed the invaders would be wiped out. Only an Egyptian relief force prevented total disaster for Ramesses II. Fighting lasted through the day, each side claiming some advantage. Modern analysis suggests the Egyptians escaped encirclement, but likely did not seize Kadesh. Yet Ramesses II returned to Egypt proclaiming a glorious success, while Hittite accounts emphasize their own triumph. Subsequent negotiations and shifting conditions led to what is sometimes referred to as the earliest fully documented peace treaty in history. The key points of that accord, often called the Treaty of Kadesh, survive in inscriptions and cuneiform tablets. It created a relatively stable border and introduced mutual non-aggression clauses, with each state pledging to come to the other's aid if needed. The Hittite Empire in Egypt would remain at peace, bound by both political necessity and dynastic marriage arrangements, with a Hittite princess sent to become a wife of Ramesses II. An era of relative calm followed in the southern portion of the Hittite realm. Elsewhere, however, the empire had to contend with numerous regional challenges. Along the Aegean coast, Mycenaean power was on the rise. Some scholars believe the Hittites were drawn into conflicts involving Troy, known in Hittite texts as Walusa, and western Anatolian states that had shifting alliances with Mycenaean Greece. Certain letters uncovered at Hattusa refer to campaigns and treaties concerning Walusa, possibly hinting at episodes that mirror or underpin the Greek legends of the Trojan War. Indeed, references to Ahiawa in Hittite records may denote Mycenaean Greeks. One letter from the Hittite king to the ruler of Walusa references a prior military confrontation. This has prompted debate as to whether the Trojan War of later Greek epic has a historical kernel in real conflicts between the Hittites, their western vassals, and Mycenaean Greeks. Since Greek tradition does not feature the Hittites by name, scholars propose many hypotheses for why the Hittites were left out of that epic cycle. The question remains unresolved, but is a testament to the empire's broad involvement in international affairs. The last century of Hittite power was overshadowed by a multitude of catastrophes that convulsed the entire Bronze Age. Multiple factors contributed to systemic upheaval across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Prolonged drought, crop failures, seismic activity, and shifting trade routes undermined the once robust, interlocking networks of palace economies. Sources of tin, essential for bronze making, grew more elusive. The region's reliance on bronze left large armies vulnerable when their supply chains faltered. Meanwhile, maritime raiders or migrating groups, often dubbed the Sea Peoples, arrived in force. They ravaged coastal cities in the Levant, and may have been part of a larger wave of displaced peoples moving across the region. The Egyptians survived these onslaughts under leaders such as Ramesses III, though at great cost. The Mycenaean palaces of mainland Greece were either destroyed or abandoned, and many of the city-states that once thrived on maritime commerce were gone. Within Hittite territory, the situation deteriorated rapidly in the early 12th century BCE. The capital at Hattusa was abandoned, palaces burned, and the royal family disappeared from the historical record. One possibility is that the final kings or queens fled southward, but no direct record survives to confirm every detail. In the ensuing centuries, new political entities emerged across Anatolia and northern Syria, sometimes called Neo-Hittite or Syro-Hittite principalities. These smaller states retained elements of Hittite cultural tradition, language, and administrative practice. However, the United Empire had ceased to exist. Remarkably, memory of this once powerful realm faded so completely that, for over 2 millennia, references to Hittites in biblical texts were assumed to mean only a minor Canaanite people. Not until explorers and archaeologists of the 19th century rediscovered the remains of Hattusa did the full story come to light. Epigraphic breakthroughs, especially the decipherment of Hittite cuneiform, revealed a civilization that had negotiated as equals with mighty Egypt and Assyria, conquered Babylon in a daring campaign, and vied for influence in lands ranging from the Aegean to the Euphrates. They left behind some of the oldest surviving documents in an Indo-European language, extraordinary art and architecture, monumental city walls around Hattusa, and thousands of tablets that preserve their history and mythology. Based on those tablets, one can glean details of daily life, religion, law, and administration. The Hittites recognized a vast pantheon that included a principal storm god and sun goddess, but also a host of local deities from each region and city under Hittite sway. Ritual ceremonies abounded, integrating older Hattian, Hurrian, and Luwian elements. A reverence for natural features such as springs and rocks was common, hinting at a religion deeply connected to the land. They employed specialized oracle interpreters, bird watchers, and old women associated with magic and healing rituals. While war was a dominant concern of the monarchy, the Hittite legal system appears to have been nuanced for its time, with fines often replacing harsh physical punishments. Contracts, state treaties, cult inventories, and personal letters survive, illustrating an advanced bureaucratic tradition able to unify a vast and culturally diverse empire. Military organization was also sophisticated. Archival texts describe the logistical support needed for large forces, including training programs for chariot horses. The three-man chariot crew, driver, shield-bearer, and spearman, proved effective in battles against neighboring powers. Yet warfare during this era was never limited to a single method. Armies marched on foot, allied contingents assembled for major campaigns, navy or fleet operations were sometimes outsourced to friendly coastal states. Hittite kings often delegated military roles to trusted relatives and vassal rulers, further tying conquered territories into their command structure. Over the course of the 14th to 13th centuries BCE, repeated leadership struggles occurred. Rulers like Muwatalli II and Hattusili III had to balance internal rivalries against the ever-present threat of Assyria, which rose as a formidable power in Mesopotamia. When conflicts erupted with Egypt and Syria, the monarchy diverted attention southward, occasionally allowing other frontiers to weaken. Eventually, it was the combination of climate change, famine, external invasion, and the collapse of widespread Bronze Age trade patterns that drove the entire system to ruin. Hittite lands fragmented, with breakaway principalities appearing in the southeastern corner of Anatolia and in northern Syria. Some of these states endured for centuries, preserving cultural traits in the Iron Age, but the glorious unity of the empire period never returned. In modern times, the rediscovery of the Hittites has profoundly influenced the field of ancient history. The decipherment of Hittite texts provided the earliest known Indo-European documents, reshaping theories about the movements of peoples and languages in prehistory. Detailed legal and diplomatic tablets unearthed at Hattusa transformed scholarly perspectives on how ancient states conducted treaties and regulated property, while reference to their multi-ethnic pantheon has shed light on how religious syncretism operated in the Late Bronze Age. Sites like Alaka, Hoyuk, Yazılakaya, and others affiliated with Hittite rule continue to yield invaluable knowledge about their architectural achievements and artistic sensibilities, which included Sphinx gate portals, elaborate relief carvings, and advanced fortifications that took full advantage of the rocky terrain. Many aspects of Hittite culture still raise questions. Ongoing excavations and newly translated tablets prompt lively debates among historians and archaeologists. For instance, the potential Hittite connection to events recorded in Greek epic, such as a war involving Wilusa, Troy, remains a subject of considerable fascination. Though no definitive Hittite-Trojan War narrative has yet come to light, partial letters suggest hostilities did erupt near that region. Some maintain that later Greek oral traditions might have woven genuine historical conflicts into mythic form, thus obscuring the Hittite presence from the final narratives. Other riddles include the precise nature of the so-called Sea Peoples, groups that appear in Egyptian inscriptions as foreign invaders attacking the coasts of the Levant. No single origin or identity for those peoples can be established with certainty. Some propose that they were roving mercenaries from different parts of the Aegean and Anatolia, while others suspect they were displaced populations fleeing calamities in their homelands. Whatever the truth, their arrival coincided with the most tumultuous decades of the 13th to 12th centuries BCE, when so many Bronze Age palaces were destroyed or abandoned. Hittite texts go relatively silent after this point, since the seat of the monarchy itself was overrun. Yet the story did not end entirely. Smaller successor states, often called Neo-Hittite kingdoms, arose in the aftermath of the imperial collapse. Centered primarily in northern Syria and southeastern Anatolia, they carried forward some of the Hittite language, especially in Luwian inscriptions, and used iconography reminiscent of the earlier empire. Over several centuries, they navigated among new powers, including the Assyrian Empire, which increasingly dominated the region. Eventually, these states too were overshadowed and absorbed by rising empires of the Iron Age, and their local traditions faded over time. This sequence of events, the emergence of the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom's murky historical record, the empire's grand flourish, and the ultimate fall, remains one of the most compelling examples of the rise and decline of a complex society. The Hittite story underscores how interconnected the late 2nd millennium BCE world was. No kingdom, not even one as powerful as the Hittite Empire, could sustain itself once its trade routes, agricultural base, and alliances began to unravel. Internal discord might have been contained had external pressures not been so relentless, but the double blow of environmental stress and migrating populations proved insurmountable. For students and enthusiasts of ancient history, the Hittite narrative also highlights the importance of archaeology and epigraphy. Without the tablets discovered at Hattusa and subsequent decipherment of the language, the Hittite Empire might still be relegated to footnotes. Instead, those clay tablets and majestic ruins allow present-day observers to witness the complexity of a Bronze Age empire in startling detail. We can read their diplomatic treaties, see how they hammered out alliances, punished crimes, organized provisioning for their campaigns, honored their gods, and shaped a world that, for centuries, was every bit as significant as that of contemporary Egypt or Babylon. Even the daily life of Hittite citizens, farmers, traders, soldiers, and artisans emerges from these records. We learn of farmland allocated to temples, of caravans carrying precious metals and textiles across dangerous roads, of the efforts to train and feed horses for the mighty chariot forces, and of religious ceremonies that might last for days. Children of noble families studied in scribal academies, where they learned cuneiform and sometimes Akkadian for external diplomacy. Meanwhile, in the countryside, shepherds tended flocks of sheep, weavers produced textiles that were prized exports, and blacksmiths or metallurgists refined copper and tin into bronze goods. In the later periods, experimentation with iron could be glimpsed, though the technology would not truly dominate until well after the empire's collapse. When climate pressures hit, and when earthquakes and foreign raiders inflicted damage, the structure of Hittite governance buckled. Relief efforts were attempted, illustrated by pleas for shipments of grain from Egypt during periods of famine. Surviving letters show desperation as local administrators begged for resources. They also hint at a fleeting sense of cooperation between the Hittites and Egyptians to fend off total disaster. But these measures were not enough to halt the spiraling crisis. Vassals fell away, once loyal allies turned independent, and enemy forces took advantage of the turmoil. In time, the capital itself was abandoned. Today, visitors to Hattusa can still walk along remnants of massive walls and pass through monumental gates that once towered over the plateau. Many standing structures, such as the Lion Gate and the King's Gate, are restored or partially reconstructed to hint at the city's grandeur. Further uphill, traces of temples and administrative buildings lie scattered, preserving testament to a once thriving metropolis. In museum collections, exquisite seals, weapons, tablets, and sculptures stand as silent witnesses to an empire that has at last reclaimed its place in world history. In broad strokes, the Hittites exemplify how societies of the late Bronze Age coexisted, competed, and exchanged ideas across wide distances. Their interactions with Egypt, Assyria, Mycenae and Greece, and other groups illustrate a network of diplomatic marriages, alliances, and trade that stretched from the Aegean coast to the Zagros Mountains, and from the Black Sea to the Upper Nile. It was a world in which caravans, ships, emissaries, and scribes connected far-flung capitals. Contending powers might fight each other in a major battle one year, yet trade gold for grain or exchange royal daughters soon after. The Hittites integrated local beliefs and religious ceremonies from each region they conquered, earning them a reputation for religious tolerance and broad-mindedness when it came to divine powers. In fact, their pantheon became so extensive that some texts jokingly refer to it as comprising 1,000 gods. Few political entities in antiquity matched the Hittite ability to incorporate so many different languages and peoples. The empire tolerated, or at least managed, distinct local traditions and left behind a tapestry of cultural influences. Archaeological findings demonstrate that, in the capital, worship of gods from Syria, Hurrian cities, and other lands occurred side by side with that of the traditional Hittite storm god, Tahun, and the sun goddess of Arina. This tolerance suggests that official policy favored pragmatic coexistence, possibly guided by the monarchy's conviction that winning over foreign gods might prevent divine wrath. Ultimately, the Bronze Age collapse reshaped the entire region. Major centers of power disappeared, trade networks disintegrated, and once literate societies receded into illiteracy. Even Assyria and Egypt, which managed to carry on, emerged in a weakened form, overshadowed by future powers in subsequent centuries. Greece stumbled into a dark age of small-scale communities and impoverished settlements, severing the chain of palace economies that had united Mycenaean kingdoms. Anatolia changed considerably, with new peoples like Phrygians and Lydians eventually rising on the scene. By the time classical Greek authors wrote about Asia Minor, the world of the Hittites was already a distant memory. Yet the Hittite story, how they arose, flourished, and fell, remains an essential chapter in humanity's shared past. The thousands of tablets, the monuments at Hattusa, and the echoes preserved in neighboring traditions reveal a civilization that for centuries maintained a formidable empire, rivaling Egypt in terms of territory, sophistication, and resilience. They campaigned as far as Babylon, confronted Ramesses II on the battlefield, possibly influenced the Trojan War saga, and weathered numerous catastrophes before succumbing to the vast wave of upheavals that ended the Bronze Age. This dramatic arc of power and dissolution underscores the fragility of ancient states, no matter how rich or robust they appear. The rediscovery of the Hittite civilization stands as one of archaeology's triumphs. Anyone examining the history of early empires now includes the Hittites among the great powers of the 2nd millennium BCE. Their capital at Hattusa, designated a World Heritage Site, showcases the remains of temples, granaries, palatial complexes, and fortifications that once awed travelers in antiquity. Their laws, myths, and political treaties shed light on how advanced the Late Bronze Age truly was, featuring extensive interstate diplomacy, legal codes, and a pantheon that merged many older traditions. Although overshadowed for centuries by Mesopotamian and Egyptian glories, the Hittites have reclaimed their place in scholarly discourse as a central pillar of Near Eastern history. Even today, new excavations and research reveal more about their achievements. Studies of their fortress architecture demonstrate advanced engineering, while analysis of clay seal impressions clarifies the administrative network that united a far-flung empire. Inscriptions carved on rock walls in hieroglyphic Luwian, another language used by Hittite elites, continue to yield genealogical insights and references to campaigns. Although many mysteries remain, the general outline of Hittite civilization is now unmistakable. It was a mighty empire bridging the east and west of the Late Bronze Age, playing a pivotal role in shaping the political and cultural trajectory of a wide swath of the ancient world. Thus ends the sweeping account of the Hittites, the once forgotten masters of a realm that stretched from the Aegean to the fringes of Mesopotamia. The silence that cloaked their memory for over 2 millennia has been dispelled by archaeological discoveries and the decipherment of cuneiform. They stood shoulder to shoulder with the famous kingdoms of antiquity, forging alliances, waging epic wars, and leaving behind a legacy whose rediscovery has transformed our perception of the distant past.